be an IELTS examiner in Spain and China, and I've done thousands of speaking tests. I've realized that there are certain phrases that high-level students use naturally that help their answers sound more sophisticated and fluent. I'm going to teach you 10 phrases which will help you to expertly express your opinions, develop your answers, and convey subtle differences. The first phrase is to some extent. It means partly, but not completely. So if you say, I agree to some extent, you're saying that you agree with part of the idea, but not all of it. This is a really useful phrase when the examiner asks for your opinion, like this. Do you think governments should spend more money on space exploration? I do, but only to some extent. I think space exploration is exciting and can lead to cool technological advances, but I don't think it should take priority over essential services like healthcare and education. So it's really about finding the right balance. The great thing about to some extent is that it naturally leads to a balanced answer. Instead of simply saying yes or no, you can explain both sides of the issue, which helps you develop your answer more fully. In my answer, I said, I do, but only to some extent. And then I explained why governments should invest in space exploration and why they shouldn't prioritize it over other areas. That's exactly the kind of well-developed answer that examiners like to hear in part 3. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. I agree to some extent, I think that's true to some extent, or yes, but only to some extent. If you want to improve your vocabulary for the IELTS test, I'm going to suggest 2 things. The first is to do my IELTS vocabulary course. I'll show you useful advanced vocabulary for all the common topics in IELTS. You can do quizzes and download PDFs, and then the next thing you can do is to do my IELTS speaking course. In this course, we'll look at model answers and vocabulary, and you can write your own answers to popular questions and get AI feedback. You can start both courses for free at EnglishProTips.com. The next phrase is comes down to. It means the most important reason is, or the deciding factor is. In other words, you're explaining what you think is really at the heart of the issue. This is a really useful phrase when the examiner asks you questions about your opinions, like this. Why do some people enjoy living in cities while others prefer the countryside? I think ultimately it comes down to personality. Some people enjoy the fast pace of cities and having lots of things to do, whereas others value the peace and quiet of the countryside. At the end of the day, it comes down to what kind of lifestyle suits you best. The great thing about comes down to is that it helps you explain the main reason behind your opinion. Instead of listing lots of different ideas, you can identify the one you think is the most important, which makes your answer sound clearer and more organized. In my answer, I said, I think ultimately it comes down to personality. And then I explained why different personalities prefer different lifestyles. You could use this phrase in lots of different ways. I think it comes down to, ultimately it comes down to, it really comes down to, at the end of the day, it comes down to, or I guess it comes down to. It's a simple expression, but it's one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them explain the main reasons behind their ideas. The next phrase is for instance. It means, for example. You can use it to introduce an example that supports or explains your main idea. This is really useful because high-level candidates don't just give opinions, they also explain them with examples. Like this. Why do some people enjoy learning English? I think there are lots of different reasons. For instance, some people need English for their careers, while others learn it because they enjoy traveling or communicating with people from different countries. The great thing about for instance is that it helps you develop your answers naturally. Instead of making a general statement and moving on, you can support your ideas with an example which makes your answer sound more convincing and well developed. In my answer, I said, for instance, some people need English for their careers. And then I gave another example of people learning English for travel and communication. Adding examples like this is a simple way to extend your answers and show the examiner that you can develop your ideas. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. For instance, if, take my country for instance, or for instance, one of my friends. It's a simple expression, but it's one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them support their ideas with clear, relevant examples. The next phrase is having said that. It means although what I just said is true, there's another side to consider. You use it when you want to introduce a contrasting idea without completely changing your opinion. This is really useful because many IELTS speaking part 3 questions require you to consider both sides of an issue. Like this. Do you think working from home is better than working in an office? I think working from home has lots of advantages because it gives people more flexibility and saves time traveling to work. Having said that, I do think going into the office can be beneficial because it's often easier to collaborate with colleagues and build relationships. The great thing about having said that is that it helps you give a balanced answer. Instead of only talking about one side of the argument, you can acknowledge a different point of view, which makes your answer sound more thoughtful and well developed. In my answer, I said, having said that, and then I explained why working in an office also has its advantages. This shows the examiner that you can consider different perspectives rather than giving a one-sided answer. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. Having said that, I also think. Having said that, there are some drawbacks. Or having said that, it really depends. It's a simple expression, but it's one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them discuss both sides of an issue in a fluent and natural way. The next phrase is on the one hand, on the other hand. You can use it when you want to present both sides of an argument. This is a really useful phrase because many IELTS speaking part 3 questions ask you to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of an issue rather than simply giving one opinion. Like this. Do you think children should have homework every day? Well, on the one hand, homework gives children the chance to practice what they've learned in class and develop good study habits. On the other hand, too much homework can leave them with less time to relax or spend with their families. I guess it comes down to finding the right level of homework for the different age groups. The useful thing about on the one hand, on the other hand, is that it helps you to organize your answer clearly. Instead of jumping from one idea to another, you can present both sides in a logical way, which makes your answer easier to follow and more well developed. In my answer, I said on the one hand, before explaining the benefits of homework, and then I used on the other hand to introduce the disadvantages. This makes it very clear to the examiner that I'm considering both sides of the issue. Again, it's a simple idiom, but it's one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them present balanced, well-organized ideas. The next phrase is if. It might seem like a simple word, but it's one that high-level candidates use all the time. If is used to form conditional sentences, and conditionals are considered an example of advanced grammar in the IELTS speaking test. So by using if naturally in your answers, you're showing the examiner that you can use a wider range of grammatical structures. Let's see it in action. Do you think people spend too much time on their phones? I think some people probably do. If you use your phone for work or study, it's understandable that you'll spend several hours on it each day. However, if you're constantly checking social media for no real reason, it can become a bit of a bad habit. The great thing about if is that it helps you develop your answers naturally. Instead of giving a short opinion, you can explore different situations or explain how your answer changes depending on the circumstances. This makes your response sound much more thoughtful and well developed. In my answer, I used if you use your phone for work or study to explain one situation, and then I used another conditional. If you're constantly constantly checking social media, to contrast it with a different situation. This not only helped me extend my answer, but it also demonstrated that I can use advanced grammar accurately. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. If you think about it, if that's the case, if I had to choose, if I were, if that happened. It's a simple word, but it's one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them develop their answers while also demonstrating a wider range of grammatical structures. The next phrase is "the thing is." It's a really natural expression that native speakers use to introduce an explanation or clarify what they really mean. It's a great way to express nuance because it allows you to explain that a situation is more complicated than it first appears. Like this: do you think people are healthier nowadays than they were in the past? The thing is, it's quite difficult to give a simple yes or no answer. On the one hand, people have access to better healthcare and know much more about nutrition. Having said that, many people also lead much more sedentary lifestyles than they used to. So I think it depends on the individual. What I really like about "the thing is that it helps you express nuance. Instead of giving a simple answer, you can explain why the issue is more complex or why there are exceptions. This makes your answer sound much more thoughtful and natural. In my answer, I said, "The thing is, it's quite difficult to give a simple yes or no answer," before explaining both sides of the issue. This helped me avoid giving an overly simple opinion and allowed me to develop my answer more fully. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. The thing is, it depends. The thing is, not everyone. The thing is, it's not that simple. Or the thing is, there are lots of different factors. Again, a simple expression, but one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them express more nuanced ideas and explain their opinions more clearly. The next phrase is "it depends." In my opinion, these are two of the most useful words in the entire IELTS speaking test. That's because very few questions have a simple yes or no answer. High-level candidates recognize this, so instead of giving an absolute opinion, they often begin by saying "it depends on" and then explain what factors affect their answer. Like this: do you think it's better to work for a large company or a small company? It depends on what you're looking for. If you want more opportunities for promotion and career development, a large company is probably the better option. On the other hand, if you prefer a more relaxed working environment where you know everyone, a smaller company might suit you better. The useful thing about "it depends" is that it helps you express nuance. Instead of giving a one-sided answer, you can explain the different factors that influence your opinion. This makes your response sound much more thoughtful and well developed. In my answer, I said "it depends on what you're looking for," and then I explained two different situations. This showed the examiner that I could consider more than one perspective rather than giving an overly simple answer. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. It depends on the person, it depends on the situation, it depends on what you mean by, it depends on your priorities, or simply, it depends, but just make sure you explain it. It's such a simple expression, but it's one that high-level candidates use all the time because it helps them give balanced, natural answers instead of making broad generalizations. The next phrase is "tends to." It means that something happens often, but not always. This is a really useful phrase because it gives a great way to hedge your language. In other words, instead of making an absolute statement that might not always be true, you make a more careful generalization. High-level candidates do this all the time. Like this: why do some people prefer shopping online? I think people tend to shop online because it's usually more convenient. They can compare prices, read reviews, and have everything delivered to their door. Of course, some people still prefer shopping in physical stores, but I think online shopping tends to be the more popular option these days. The wonderful thing about "tends to" is that it helps you avoid making overly strong statements. Compare these two sentences. Young people spend too much time on social media. Young people tend to spend more time on social media. The second sentence sounds much more natural because you're recognizing that not every young person is the same. That's exactly the kind of careful language that examiners like to hear. In my answer, I said people tend to shop online because it's usually more convenient. And then I acknowledged that there are exceptions. This made my answer sound more balanced and realistic. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. People tend to, children tend to, it tends to be, they tend to have, or this tends to happen when. It's a simple expression, but it's one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them make a balanced, realistic generalization rather than absolute claims. The final phrase is the idiom strike a balance. Even though it's the last phrase on my list, it's still a really useful one to learn. It means to find a compromise between two different ideas or situations rather than choosing one extreme or the other. This is especially useful in IELTS Speaking Part 3, where many questions involve discussing both sides of an issue. Like this. Do you think children should spend more time studying or playing? I think it's important to strike a balance. Studying is obviously essential because it helps children develop important knowledge and skills. Having said that, they also need plenty of time to play, relax, and socialize if they're going to develop in a healthy way. The brilliant thing about strike a balance is that it helps you to give a balanced conclusion. After discussing different viewpoints, you can use this phrase to explain that the best solution is often somewhere in the middle. In my answer, I said it's important to strike a balance before explaining why both studying and playing are valuable. This showed the examiner that I wasn't taking an extreme and could consider different perspectives. You can use this phrase in lots of different ways. We need to strike a balance. It's important to strike a balance between something and something else. The key is to strike a balance. Or I think the best approach is to strike a balance. It's a simple expression, but it's one that high-level candidates use naturally because it helps them give balanced, well-reasoned answers rather than choosing one extreme over the other. Make sure to download the PDF for this lesson, and more importantly, practice this vocabulary. A great way to practice it would be to go to my IELTS speaking course and use it in your answers. Then get AI feedback on your answers and see whether you've used it appropriately. Best of luck with all of your studies, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye then.